So a few months ago, I made a video that was my preferred mods for the campaign to make a grand strategy campaign. And in that video, I alluded to another video that I was working on that was going to be the same things, but for battles. So instead of grand strategy, more of a grand tactics type of a mod compilation. And a number of you asked, well, when am I finally going to release that? Well, I had my eye on a particular mod that looked like it was going to be not exactly an all-in-one compilation, but it was going to be one mod that did the same thing as a number of other mods were doing. And I wanted for them to update that so that it would include the new units that came out in Thrones of Decay. And long story short, they never did. So I kept putting off doing that best mods for battle tactics video until now. And that is because I'm happy to say that while I was waiting for that other one to get updated, Heus, who is the excellent modder who created the Heus AI Overhaul suite of mods that I recommended using for the campaign, well, he has now done something that is a little bit of an all-in-one for the battles. So what I thought I'd do here is go ahead and really quickly talk about this. It only dropped a few days ago. I started testing it out to make sure that I had a good sense of what it does. And so I'm going to talk about this for a little bit, going through a little bit of what he mentions here in the description, and then also show a little bit of the examples on the battlefield. So let's go ahead and jump into this. So basically the idea behind a battle overhaul like this is for those of us who feel like the current pacing of battles in vanilla Warhammer is too fast. It's a little bit too arcadey. It's a little bit too much of a not so much using brilliant tactics, but more of a who can click the fastest, who can do the microing the fastest. And that's fine. I mean, there's going to be people that appeals to, but it doesn't appeal to all of us. And I prefer a slightly slower paced battle where you actually have time to do what I would think of as more as your classic tactics. Like you've got your hammer and anvil tactics, you've got your flankers, you've got basically enough time to see your ideas come to fruition on the battlefield instead of it just being everything happening much, much too quickly. So having said all that, that's the idea behind it. Obviously, other people feel the same way. That's why mods like this exist. So I'm going to really quickly go through what he says here. Now, I can't possibly cover in the videos, in the examples that I do, everything that he lists here. So that's why I want to read through a lot of this as quickly as possible. I promise I will try to be succinct and then get right into the examples. So now, keeping in mind that I think Heus is French, and so a lot of this I feel like is probably a translation into English from French. The same thing applies to some of the comments. He is active. He does respond to people who comment, but just keep that in mind that there could sometimes be a little bit of a difficulty in terms of the translation back and forth between English and French. So I hope that I haven't gotten that part of it wrong. So as he says here, this mod is to make the battles more realistic, slower, more logical, but keeping the fantastic side. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that this is Warhammer after all. This is not a historical title. We don't want to completely take out all the fantasy out of a Warhammer title, but he's looking to have balance and harmony. And obviously, this is a pretty important thing right there. No more spells that decimate an entire army. So the magic itself is going to be nerfed a little bit, which we'll get into here in a second. But here's something that I think is extremely important, and that is this mod is compatible with all custom unit mods. So this is really, really nice. I think this is a huge advantage of this mod as opposed to the other one that I mentioned at the very beginning that I was waiting for them to update. They had to update that because there were new units that were introduced in Thrones of Decay, not to mention some changes to some other units. But here we go. So if you wanted to reduce the damage of ranged units, you had to modify the statistics of the units, and the same for the heroes, for example. But this feature has a slight disadvantage. It doesn't take into account custom battles. So to take full advantage of the mod, it will happen in the... Okay, so anyway. Okay, so yeah, as you can see here, he's got these different categories. We'll go through them very, very quickly here. Melee damage, chance to hit reduced by 50%. Damage has been reduced I took the liberty of reducing the attack intervals visually for a more dynamic aspect of the fight. So this is one thing that I kept an eye on when I was testing out some examples. It's pretty subtle. I don't think it's anything that's going to feel overpowered in one way or the other. Projectile damage slightly reduced. The accuracy of your shots has been reduced. This is kind of important here, so be careful not to kill your own unit. So I did try an example where I was firing with an archer unit over the heads of my own melee unit that was in melee with an enemy unit. I didn't really notice that it was having a huge impact on damaging my own units, but obviously it is something to keep in mind here. Ammunition has been increased, and I like this right here. Shields more effectively block projectiles when facing its trajectory. So this is one of the things that I like the idea of making shields something that, I mean, not that you wouldn't pay attention to those things before, but you pay more attention to them now in terms of they have increased effectiveness, but they have to be facing correctly. So getting around the flanks and firing from the flanks or from the rear is going to be a super useful way to try to shoot into units that have shields. Okay, magic damage. Spell damage has been reduced by 50%. Magic recharge has been slightly reduced. The total capacity of magic, the winds of magic, has been doubled to match the long battle gameplay, but also with the reduction of spell damage. And the duration of summons has been tripled. So you're going to see overall, your damaging spells are going to do less damage, obviously, but I think magic is going to continue to be a really important part of your battles. So it's not nerfed completely. And he's trying to balance out here in terms of the speed of your recharge and the total capacity so that in a longer battle you don't burn through it all there at the very beginning. Then we have healing. The cap of the life points possible to regenerate is reduced by 25%. Hit point regeneration has been reduced by 50%. Charging, this is one thing that I noticed probably as much as anything else in the example. For a more dynamic visual and strategic aspect, knockdowns have been maximized. Large mass entities, cavalries, etc. will project units far away in the event of charges. I like this. You'll see an example of it. Actually, you'll see several examples of it. You will be able to break shield walls with a cavalry charge. Charge damage has been slightly increased by 10%. Then we had, and this, I think that sounds pretty good. Overall, I think maybe my biggest gripe with the cavalry units in the vanilla game is how you charge in and then like it's very, very hard to extract your cavalry units from a melee that they're in. They'll bump into a single unit and that will kind of bog down the entire unit. Well, I'm sorry to say that's not going to be completely fixed, but this does improve that. Fatigue, he does make a little bit of changes here to fatigue, so been reduced by 50% overall. I'm not exactly sure what this means. It'd be useful to put fresh aside and do some turnover. I'm assuming what he means by that is to give some units a chance to rest and recover some fatigue before you throw them back into the melee. That's what I'm assuming, but I don't want to say that with any certainty. And then no more units arriving exhausted after the climbing the ladder. This has been adjusted to fit with the fact that I've reduced the speed for ladder climbing units during sieges. I'm going to show an example of this as well, and that's really important. I really like the fact that the speed of ladder climbing is slowed down. Okay, morale impacts have been halved and adjusted in some places for better balance and more strategic gameplay. No more army, I think he means army losses here. Army complete at 70%, but fleeing when they still had the potential to inflict heavy losses on you. So in other words, if the opposing army's at 70% still, but you inflict army losses on them or you use magic or something like that to make them all run away, he's trying to basically nerf that a bit. Above all, when you know the weakness of the AI, it's not complicated. Use bug to scare away the whole army each time. So, for example, if you're fighting low leadership enemies, you can kind of use a couple of different methods to drop their morale really quickly, and the next thing you know, you've broken the whole army. Okay, siege. The health points of walls and gates have been doubled to correspond more to a long battle, which I think makes sense. Speed for climbing the ladder has been reduced by 25%. The speed for climbing walls has been reduced by 50%. I don't know what the difference is between these two. I will have to admit. To me, you're using the ladders to climb the walls, so I don't exactly know what climbing the ladder versus climbing the walls means. But again, I'll show an example of it. And then I think let's go ahead then and get into our our examples. All right, so this is during a campaign. I was playing a Wood Elf campaign here with Orion. This is just the very first battle. This is Legendary, very hard difficulty. But again, I just wanted to show how this would play out in an actual campaign. So I set this up so that we can get sort of our spear units up against their melee units. We've got 3 different cavalry that I wanted to test out how they would work on the cavalry charges. And then also, of course, with our ranged units, our missile units, I wanted to see how they would do firing into melee. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and get a couple of our calves running into their melee lines. Right here, for example, we're going to get these stags charging into those archer units. So, and then we also have the cavalry down here. I missed the charge itself on the right side here, but we're going to get to see this one right here against the archers. And then I go ahead and send in the other cavalry unit as well. So we can kind of see that it was a little bit too far away to see the units flying. That's okay. We'll zoom in on a later charge. But you can see that our stags do kind of disintegrate the enemy archers there pretty quickly. Disintegrate's probably too strong of a word, but you know what I'm saying. We broke them very, very quickly. Okay, so here we go. I drop a little magic. And it's pretty, you know, it does noticeable damage, but it's pretty, I wouldn't say subtle exactly, but it's certainly not overpowered. Let me put it that way. So overall here, hopefully you can get a sense of the pacing. You can see, other than the fact that when our stags charged into those archers, they broke pretty quickly. Here's a little bit more magic. Other than that, you know, things are not happening quite as quickly as they would in vanilla. So we'll get a better look here in the next battle, which is against more units, but it's a slightly weaker army that we're opposing here. This is just the settlement garrison. Battle started. We go charging in with our stags against their archers that are over here on the flank. Same thing over on the other flank, so we actually do it in both places here. And there you go. Now that's a better example of watching some of them go flying. We'll get another one again over here against the archers on our right flank. These are stag units against pretty low-level archers, so you would expect them to do pretty significant damage, and indeed they do. All right, so I decided after doing a little bit of it in the campaign, it might be a little bit more useful to do a controlled test. So I threw together here an army of some green skin, mainly orc biggins here, going up against some Khorne units here. So this is sort of melee versus melee, but I threw in an archer unit to get a better sense of these archers shooting over our own front line into the enemy and how, you know, what effect that would have, as well as I wanted to get another cavalry charge in to show what this cavalry charge against a shielded unit would look like. So here we go, just running our units forward. We charge into the enemy line now. It's a little bit hard for me to tell if our movement speed has been reduced. I'm assuming it hasn't been because I don't remember reading that in the mod description, but it does look to me like maybe we're moving a little bit slower than usual, but that's probably just my imagination because it was a long distance for us to traverse. But anyway, so our front line, which is just the orc biggins, go ahead and charge right in to their front line, which you can now, I think, get a kind of a sense for the speed of melee versus melee. It's going to, obviously damage is happening, but it's not quite as quickly as it would be in vanilla. And then boom, you can just see we did an orc boar boy charge that kind of plowed right through the shielded unit there, the marauders. Now, they did not all go flying the way that the archers did, but you can see that our cavalry charge did mostly pierce the whole way through, enough that it was actually a little bit easier for me to pull these guys back out through the back of their unit rather than just pulling straight back from the same direction that we attacked from originally. And then, unfortunately, we do still see the same problem that's going to probably always exist in this game, which is that our just one or two of our models get called up here, and it doesn't in this case ruin the whole unit, because I am able to reform the unit over here, but it's just kind of a little bit frustrating to see cavalry not be able to escape any easier than they can. And then here, now we're going to do the same thing where we're doing a charge into the same unit, but we're charging them from behind. And boom, there you can see some units go flying a little bit more. So, and again, we end up coming out the other side. So that kind of gives you a sense for the cavalry charges against pretty decent melee units. And then our archers, meanwhile, are firing over the heads of our own front line into the enemy here. It's a little bit hard for me to tell whether or not they're doing much in the way of friendly fire damage. It looks like maybe they've done a little bit, at least there in the middle. Well, no, actually, it looks like it's pretty hard to tell which of our orc big boys are doing the best against the Khorne front line. Okay, and so that was the pacing of battle in a regular field battle. I thought it would also be important to get an example of a walled siege battle, and that is because of what he mentioned about slowing down the ladder climbing. So I decided this time to set it up the same basic greenskin army, except instead of the cavalry and the archers, I added a giant unit to see how quickly he would be able to break down a gate. And here we go. Our units approach the walls and the gate. We can see that the health of the walls and the gates, as he said, are a little bit higher than they are in vanilla. Our giant goes ahead and runs up and starts attacking it. Meanwhile, our orc big boys here go ahead and start climbing up the walls. And I'm going to go ahead and linger on them for a moment so you can see the speed at which they are climbing up the ladders, which is to say, a little bit less than in vanilla. And of course, what this means is when there are defenders up there waiting for you, it means fewer of your models are up there fighting right away, which is going to give a little bit more of an advantage to the defenders, which I think is the way that it ought to be. And indeed, you would expect these orcs to struggle a little bit against Longbeards, which is the dwarven melee infantry that I put into their army that are defending the walls up there. So I think it's safe to say advantage dwarfs. Meanwhile, as you can see, we're about ready to break through the gate here with our lord and giant. And so one of the Longbeards comes down to fight us inside the broken down gate. And now overall you can kind of get a sense for the speed of battle in this walled city battle. So definitely the slower timing getting up the walls has had an impact. The orcs are indeed struggling against the dwarf Longbeards, and our giant plus our lord are fighting one of those Longbeard units, and it's reasonably slow, the amount of damage that we're doing to them there. And that's really, I think that's the basics of this mod. It just kind of slows things down a little bit. I don't think it radically changes, who would win these different battles, but what it does do is it gives you, as the player, a little bit more time to develop your tactics, or in this case, it gives a little bit more of an advantage to the defenders of a siege battle. So hopefully that all makes sense. If any of you have any experience with this particular mod, please feel free to add your own experiences or any other thoughts or comments or questions that you might have about this or about battle modding or pacing in general. And I think I'll go ahead and leave it there for now. Hopefully this was helpful to those of you who are interested in changing the pacing of battles. And I will see you all in the next video.